The first thing you need to understand about what happened on that CNN stage is that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked into an ambush she didn't even know was happening. She thought she was going to do what she always does: deliver her talking points, get her viral moments, walk away with another win for the highlight reel. She had no idea that Senator John Kennedy had spent 3 weeks preparing for this like it was a capital murder trial. Kennedy's team had pulled every public record they could find: college transcripts, financial disclosures, voting records, tax filings, property records, social media posts going back years. They'd built a case file 3 inches thick. His chief of staff later said Kennedy spent 14 hours the weekend before just reading through it all, making notes in the margins, color-coding sections, cross-referencing dates. This wasn't a debate prep. This was prosecutorial preparation. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez showed up thinking it was going to be another friendly exchange where she could talk about billionaires and corporate greed while the audience cheered. The setup was CNN's doing. They'd pitched it as a town hall on economic policy, the progressive vision versus the conservative approach. Two representatives from opposite ends of the spectrum having a civil discussion about America's economic future. Jake Tapper would moderate. The audience would be split 50-50, progressives on one side, conservatives on the other. It all sounded very balanced and reasonable. What CNN didn't know, what nobody knew except Kennedy's inner circle, was that the senator from Louisiana had decided this wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be an education, and the student was about to learn some very painful lessons. The audience filed in that evening with the usual energy you'd expect. The progressive side was young, diverse, wearing shirts with slogans about climate justice and economic equality. A lot of them had taken time off from their nonprofit jobs or their graduate programs to be there. They believed in what AOC represented. She was their voice, their champion, the person who finally understood what they'd been trying to say. The conservative side was older, more business casual, people who'd been working and paying taxes since before AOC was born. They wanted to hear someone finally challenge her on the details, on the math, on whether any of this actually made sense. They had no idea how thoroughly their wishes were about to be granted. Kennedy arrived early. He was wearing one of his standard dark suits, nothing flashy, but he'd brought props. The coffee cup that said, "I heart suit capitalism" in big red letters, a legal pad covered in notes, and 3 accordion folders stuffed with documents, each one tabbed and organized with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years practicing law. His staff tried to make small talk with AOC's team in the green room, but there wasn't much to say. Everyone could feel something was different about tonight. Kennedy had this energy, this calm focus that trial attorneys get right before they deliver a closing argument they know is going to change everything. When AOC walked in, she was all confidence. She'd done hundreds of these by now. She knew how to work a crowd, how to deliver a line, how to make complex policy sound simple and inspiring. She'd been tweeting about the event all day, telling her millions of followers to tune in, promising to hold the line against trickle-down economics. Her staff was loose and joking around. They thought they had this. They'd prepped some good zingers about corporate welfare and tax breaks for the rich. They had talking points ready about climate change and Medicare for all. They figured Kennedy would do his usual folksy Southern thing, maybe get in a few good lines, but ultimately they'd come out looking like the serious ones with real solutions. Nobody on her team noticed that Kennedy wasn't making jokes. Nobody noticed he was already organizing his documents in a specific order. Nobody noticed that when he looked at AOC, he had the expression of a prosecutor who just found out the defendant lied on the witness stand and now had the proof in writing. The cameras went live at 8 o'clock. Tapper did his introduction, explained the format, laid out the ground rules. Each person would get opening statements, then they'd alternate answering questions from the audience and from him. It was supposed to be respectful, substantive, focused on policy. Tapper looked nervous even as he was explaining this. He'd moderated dozens of these things, but something about the way Kennedy was sitting there, perfectly still, perfectly focused, made him wonder if he'd lost control of this event before it even started. AOC went first with her opening statement. She was good at this part. She talked about her district, about families struggling to pay rent, about young people drowning in student debt, about how the system was rigged for billionaires while working people got left behind. She hit every note perfectly. The progressive side of the audience was nodding along, some of them tearing up. This was why they loved her. She made them feel seen, heard, understood. She wrapped up with her signature line about how the economy should work for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Strong applause from her side. Polite acknowledgement from the conservative side. Standard political theater. Then Kennedy stood up for his opening statement. That should have been the first warning sign. He stood up when he didn't need to. He picked up his legal pad, looked at the audience, and smiled that smile. The one that seems friendly until you really look at it and realize there's something almost predatory underneath. He didn't have prepared remarks. He just started talking in that Louisiana drawl that makes every word sound like it's being poured out slow and deliberate like molasses. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I appreciate CNN having us here tonight. I appreciate Representative Ocasio-Cortez taking the time to join us. I think this is gonna be real educational for everyone watching. Real educational." He paused, let that word hang in the air. Now the representative just gave us a passionate speech about economics and working families, and how we need to restructure everything about how this country operates financially. That's ambitious. I respect ambition. But before we get too deep into discussing how to redesign the entire American economy, I think we ought to establish something real basic, something fundamental. He looked directly at AOC. I think we ought to establish whether the person proposing to redesign the economy actually understands how the economy works. You could feel the temperature in the room drop. AOC's smile flickered for just a second. Tapper's eyes widened slightly. Kennedy kept going. "See, I'm just a simple country lawyer. Well, senator now, but I still think like a lawyer. And when someone comes into court proposing something big, something that affects a lot of people, I like to establish their credentials first. Make sure they know what they're talking about. So, Representative, before we get into policy specifics, I wonder if you could help me understand your background in economics, just so everyone watching knows what kind of expertise we're working with here." That was the trap, set so smoothly, so politely, that AOC didn't even see it. She launched into her standard bio. Grew up in the Bronx, worked as a bartender, ran a grassroots campaign, youngest woman ever elected to Congress, economics degree from Boston University. She was proud of that degree. She mentioned it often. It was her credential, her proof that she wasn't just some activist who stumbled into office but someone with actual education in this stuff. Kennedy nodded along like he was taking notes. "Boston University, that's a fine school, real fine school, I'm impressed. So you studied economics there, got your degree, learned all about how markets work, supply and demand, monetary policy, all that good stuff." He paused. "I'm curious about something, though. Do you remember much from those classes? Because I'm gonna be honest with you, Representative, I took economics at Vanderbilt and I barely remember half of it, 40 years ago now. But you're younger than me, so maybe it's fresher in your mind." AOC smiled, thinking this was going to be a friendly exchange. "I remember the important parts, Senator. The parts about how working families—" "No, ma'am, I'm not asking about working families yet." Kennedy's voice was still polite, still friendly, but now there was steel underneath it. "I'm asking about the actual economics, the technical stuff, because if we're gonna have a debate about economic policy, we need to make sure we're both speaking the same language. So let me ask you something real simple, just to get us started on the same page." He leaned forward slightly. "Can you define inflation for me? Just the basic economic definition. Nothing fancy." The room went quiet. It was such a simple question. Too simple. Everyone knew that meant it wasn't simple at all. AOC straightened in her chair. "Inflation is when prices increase, usually because of corporate price gouging and companies exploiting working people to increase their profit margins." Kennedy's smile got wider. "That's interesting. That's a theory about what might cause prices to go up in certain circumstances. But that's not the definition of inflation itself. I'm asking for the actual economic definition. You know, the one from those economics classes at Boston University, the textbook definition." You could see AOC realizing this wasn't going to be what she expected. Inflation is the general increase in prices across the economy. Getting closer, Kennedy said. But you're still missing the key part. Inflation isn't just prices going up. That can happen for all kinds of reasons. Inflation is specifically about what's happening to the currency, to the money supply. See, when there's too much money chasing too few goods, each dollar becomes worth less. That's inflation. It's a monetary phenomenon. Milton Friedman figured this out. Even Keynes understood it, though he had different ideas about what to do about it. Kennedy pulled out a document. This right here is the syllabus from Introduction to Macroeconomics at Boston University from around the time you would have taken it. Week 3, they cover inflation, monetary theory, the relationship between money supply and price levels. This is basic stuff for an economics major, first-year material. He looked at her with exaggerated confusion. You did take that class, didn't you? Of course I took it. And you passed it. Yes, I passed it. Kennedy flipped through his papers. I'm sure you did. I'm just trying to understand why someone with an economics degree from a good school can't give me the proper definition of inflation. Makes me wonder what else might be a little fuzzy. He pulled out another document, handling it carefully like evidence in a trial. This here is interesting. Took me a while to get this, had to go through some channels, call in some favors. But I managed to get hold of parts of your academic record from Boston University. Public records request. You ran for Congress, applied for government internships during college. Certain things become public when you do that. AOC's face changed. The confidence was draining fast, replaced by something that looked like dread. She knew what was coming, or she thought she did. She had no idea how bad it was actually going to be. Now, I want to be real clear about something, Kennedy continued. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to establish facts, because facts matter when we're talking about redesigning the American economy. So let's look at these facts together. He held up the papers so the camera could see them, though they were too far away for most of the audience to read. You graduated from Boston University in 2011 with a Bachelor of Arts degree. And the degree, it says right here, is in International Relations and Economics. That's 2 majors, right? Yes, it was a dual degree. Dual degree, Kennedy repeated. That sounds impressive. 2 fields of study must have taken a lot of work. He looked at the papers. But here's what's interesting to me. When I look at the actual classes you took, the economics side is pretty thin. Introduction to Macroeconomics, freshman year. Introduction to Microeconomics, sophomore year. And then, he squinted at the paper. Political Economy of Latin America, junior year. And that's about it for the pure economics courses. 3 classes total. The rest of your coursework was all in the International Relations department. Latin American politics, international development, courses on gender and globalization, post-colonial studies. All interesting subjects, don't get me wrong, but they're not economics. He looked up at her. So when you say you have a degree in economics, what you really mean is you took 3 economics classes as part of a primarily international relations degree. Is that accurate? AOC's jaw was tight. My degree program integrated both fields. I'm sure it did, but integrated doesn't mean equal, does it? Kennedy pulled out another sheet. This is Boston University's requirements for a standalone economics degree. Students have to take econometrics, that's the statistics and data analysis for economics. They have to take intermediate microeconomic theory and intermediate macroeconomic theory. They need courses in money and banking, international economics, public finance. The list goes on. 12 economics courses minimum. You took 3, and 2 of them were introductory survey courses. He set the papers down gently. Now, there's nothing wrong with an international relations degree. It's a fine degree, but it's not the same as an economics degree. And when someone's proposing to completely restructure the American economy, I think it matters whether they actually studied economics or just took a couple intro classes. The progressive side of the audience was dead silent now. The conservative side was starting to lean forward in their seats. This wasn't where they thought this was going to start, but they were here for it. Let's talk about those intro classes, though, Kennedy continued, his voice still friendly, still conversational, like he was just curious about all this. Introduction to Microeconomics. That's the class where you learn the fundamental concepts, supply and demand curves, consumer behavior, market equilibrium, how prices are determined in a market economy. Really important stuff if you're gonna be making policy about markets. He looked at another paper. According to this transcript, you got a C+ in that class. The room erupted, not in applause or boos, just in shocked murmuring. A C+ in basic economics. Kennedy waited for it to die down before continuing. Now I don't want to make too big a deal about one grade. College is hard. I got a C in statistics at Vanderbilt, like I mentioned. Sometimes you're taking 5 classes, you're busy, maybe that professor was tough. It happens. But here's the thing, Representative. I don't go around proposing to redesign America's statistical systems. I know my limitations. I got a C in stats, so I leave statistics to the statisticians. He leaned back in his chair. You got a C+ in the class that teaches you how markets work, and now you're proposing to eliminate markets and replace them with government planning. Doesn't that seem a little backwards? AOC tried to recover. Economics isn't just about grades and formulas, Senator. It's about understanding real people and real struggles. I worked as a bartender. I saw how the economy fails working families every day. You did work as a bartender, Kennedy agreed. And I respect that. Honest work is honest work. My daddy owned a small business. I grew up around working people my whole life. I understand the value of that experience. He paused. But tending bar teaches you about customer service and hard work. It doesn't teach you about monetary policy or international trade or how tax incentives affect capital formation. Those are different skill sets. He pulled out yet another document. And here's what's really interesting. After you graduated from Boston University with your 3 economics classes and your C+, did you go work in economics? Did you get a job as an economic analyst or a policy researcher or even an accountant? Silence. No, ma'am, you didn't. You went to work at a taqueria in Manhattan, which is fine work. Then you bartended. Then you did some community organizing. All fine work. But none of it is economics work. You didn't apply your economics education anywhere. You didn't work for any businesses in an economic capacity. You didn't work for any government agencies doing economic analysis. For 5 years after college, you didn't do anything related to the field you claim expertise in. Kennedy spread his hands. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You took 3 economics classes in college, one of which you got a C+ in. You didn't pursue graduate work in economics. You didn't work in any economics-related field. And then, at age 28, you ran for Congress and immediately started proposing to completely redesign the American economy with multi-trillion-dollar plans. He looked at the camera. Folks, I wouldn't trust someone with that resume to manage a lemonade stand, let alone the largest economy in human history. The conservative side erupted in applause. The progressive side looked stricken. AOC's face was bright red. She started to respond, but Kennedy held up a hand. I'm not done yet, Representative. We're just getting started because I want everyone watching to understand exactly who's proposing these massive changes to how our economy works. I want everyone to understand the credentials behind these proposals. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. We've got about an hour left. I've got a lot more to cover, so just sit tight. This is gonna be educational. That's when everyone in the room realized this wasn't a debate. It was a systematic dismantling, and AOC had just walked into it completely unprepared. If you're watching this and you want to see where this goes, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next makes those first 10 minutes look like a warm-up. This is the most thorough destruction of a political figure in modern debate history, and you're not going to want to miss a single moment. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep watching. Jake Tapper desperately tried to move things forward. He'd lost control of the format already, but he had a list of audience questions to get through. The first one was about taxation policy. A woman from the progressive side stood up and asked about how to make the wealthy pay their fair share. It was a softball designed to let AOC recover, to get back to her comfort zone. She tried. She really did. She launched into her standard talking points about billionaires not paying taxes, about loopholes and offshore accounts, about how if we just tax the rich properly, we could fund health care and education and infrastructure. It was the same speech she'd given 100 times. The audience on her side was nodding along. They'd heard this before and they loved it every time. Kennedy let her finish. He even let the applause die down naturally. Then he leaned forward with that smile again. That was real passionate, Representative. Real passionate. And I agree with you about one thing: everyone should pay what they owe in taxes. Rich, poor, middle class, everyone. The tax code is the tax code. So since we're talking about paying your fair share, I want to discuss something that's been bothering me. Something that seems, well, a little hypocritical. He pulled out a glossy color photograph and held it up. The whole room could see it. AOC in that white dress with "Tax the Rich" written across the back in huge red letters. The Met Gala, September 2021. One of her most iconic moments, photographed from every angle, shared millions of times on social media. This right here, Kennedy said, is quite a statement. Tax the Rich in big red letters at the Met Gala. That's the fundraiser for the Metropolitan Museum's Costume Institute. Very exclusive event. Tickets cost $35,000 each. That's not a typo. $35,000 for one ticket to one party. He set the photo down and pulled out more documents. Now, you've said the ticket was gifted to you by the designer Aurora James. You were her guest. She paid for the ticket. Fine, that's allowed. But here's where my simple country lawyer brain starts having trouble. The IRS has rules about gifts, Representative. When someone gives you something of significant value, you have to report it as income, and you have to pay taxes on it. Kennedy started writing numbers on his legal pad in big, clear figures. The ticket was $35,000, but that's not all you received, is it? That dress you're wearing in this photo, it was custom made for you by a prominent designer. I called some people in the fashion industry, asked what a custom gown like that costs. They told me anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 depending on materials and detail work. Your hair was done professionally. Your makeup was done professionally. You had accessories, jewelry. Let's be conservative and say the total value of everything you received that night was somewhere around $100,000. He looked up at her. Did you report any of that as income on your tax returns? AOC's voice was tight. The dress was borrowed for the event. It was returned to the designer. The ticket wasn't borrowed, Kennedy said immediately. That was consumed that night. The experience of attending wasn't returned. The makeup wasn't returned. The hairstyling wasn't returned. And even if we accept that the dress was a loan, the IRS still considers the use of valuable property as a taxable benefit. If your employer loans you a luxury car for a weekend, that's taxable compensation. Same principle applies here. He pulled out an IRS document. This is publication 525, taxable and non-taxable income. It says right here that if you receive the use of property, the fair market value of that use is includable in your income. The fair rental value of that dress for one night would be at minimum several $1,000s. Add that to the ticket, the styling, the accessories, and we're looking at a total taxable benefit of at least $100,000. Kennedy did more math on his pad. At your tax bracket, federal and state combined, you'd owe approximately $40,000 in taxes on that benefit. Did you pay those taxes? The silence was deafening. I'll take that as a no, Kennedy said quietly. So let me make sure everyone understands what happened here. You wore a dress that says "Tax the Rich" to a party that costs $35,000 to attend. You received approximately $100,000 in goods and services, and you didn't pay taxes on any of it. The IRS would call that tax evasion. I call it the most perfect example of hypocrisy I've ever seen in politics. He held up the photo again. You weren't making a statement about inequality at the Met Gala, Representative. You were participating in it. You were rubbing elbows with actual billionaires and celebrities while wearing their designer clothes and not paying your taxes. And then you had the audacity to lecture working people about paying their fair share. Kennedy pulled out financial disclosure forms. Your congressional financial disclosures are public record. I looked at them. In 2021, you reported your congressional salary and some book income. There's no mention of gifts valued at $100,000. None. Either you didn't report it, which is a violation, or you reported it and didn't pay the taxes, which is also a violation. He set everything down and looked directly at AOC. You can't spend thousands of dollars on a statement piece about taxing the rich while not paying your own taxes, Representative. You can't attend exclusive parties with billionaires while claiming to represent working people. You can't receive six-figure benefits and not report them while demanding everyone else pay more. That's not political activism. That's fraud with better photography. The conservative side was going wild. Even some people on the progressive side looked uncomfortable. This wasn't about ideology anymore. This was about basic accountability. Kennedy had her dead to rights on the facts. AOC tried to argue that the dress was a political statement, that she was infiltrating elite spaces to make a point. Kennedy cut her off. Ma'am, if you wanted to make a political statement about inequality, you could have held a press conference outside the Met Gala. Cost you nothing, but you didn't do that. You went inside. You enjoyed the party. You ate the expensive food, drank the expensive champagne, posed for photos with movie stars. You didn't infiltrate anything, you joined it. And you didn't pay taxes on your membership. He flipped to another page in his notes. And you know what makes this even more perfect? You know who actually understands the tax implications of receiving gifts and benefits like this? Economists. Real economists who study tax policy. But you only took 3 economics classes and got a C+ in the important one, so I guess tax law wasn't covered. The progressive crowd was murmuring now. Some of them looked angry at Kennedy, but others looked disappointed in AOC. The math was clear. The hypocrisy was clear. There was no way to spin this into a win. Kennedy took another sip of his coffee. But don't worry, folks. We're just getting warmed up. The Met Gala is just the appetizer. Wait till you hear about what she did to her own district's economy. He organized his next set of documents while Tapper tried to regain some control of the event. But it was useless. Kennedy had the momentum now. He had the room, and he had about 40 more minutes to keep dismantling. An older man from the conservative side stood up for the next question. Senator Kennedy, Representative Ocasio-Cortez has been very vocal about her opposition to corporate welfare and tax breaks for big companies. Can you address her record on this? Kennedy smiled like he'd been hoping someone would ask that exact question. Oh, I'd love to. Thank you, sir. He turned to AOC. Representative, let's talk about Amazon. Let's talk about what you did to your own constituents and your own district. Let's talk about the 25,000 jobs you killed because you don't understand how tax incentives work. AOC stiffened. This was the Amazon HQ2 situation. She'd been defending her position on this for years. She thought she had good arguments prepared. She had no idea what Kennedy had ready for her. For folks who don't remember, Kennedy began, addressing the audience. In 2018, Amazon announced they were going to build their second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. That's in Representative Ocasio-Cortez's district. The project was projected to bring 25,000 to 40,000 jobs over 10 years. High-paying jobs, tech jobs. Amazon was going to invest billions of dollars in the area, build infrastructure, create economic opportunity. He pulled out the economic analysis from the original deal. The average salary for these jobs was going to be $150,000 per year. That's good money. That's build day life money. That's send your kids to college money. That's the American dream money. New York State and New York City offered Amazon approximately $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years to make it happen. Kennedy looked at AOC. You opposed this deal. Vocally, aggressively, you called it corporate welfare. You said New York was going to give $3 billion to the richest man in the world. You organized protests. You rallied opposition. And eventually Amazon pulled out. They canceled the whole thing. And you celebrated. You tweeted about it like you'd won the Super Bowl. You said you'd stood up to corporate greed. He set down the documents. There's just one problem, Representative. Everything you said about that deal was wrong. Not a difference of opinion, actually, factually wrong. And your wrongness cost your constituents 25,000 jobs. Kennedy stood up for this part. He wanted to make sure everyone could see him, could hear him clearly. Tax incentives are not cash. Say it with me, folks. Tax incentives are not cash. He looked at AOC. You thought New York was going to write Amazon a $3 billion check. You genuinely believed there was $3 billion sitting in a bank account that could be spent on schools or subways instead. But that's not how any of this works. Do you know how tax incentives work, Representative? AOC started to answer, but Kennedy kept going. A tax incentive means a company pays less in taxes than they would otherwise pay. The key words there are, than they would otherwise pay. If Amazon doesn't come to New York, how much tax revenue does New York get from Amazon? None but. Correct, zero, nothing. If Amazon never comes to New York gets zero tax dollars from Amazon's operations. Kennedy wrote a big zero on his legal pad. But if Amazon does come to New York with the tax incentives, New York gets some tax revenue from Amazon. Maybe not as much as they would without incentives, but some is more than zero, much more than zero. He pulled out economic projections. The economists who analyzed this deal, and I'm talking about real economists with actual credentials, not C-plus students, estimated that Amazon would have generated approximately $27 billion in tax revenue over 10 years. The incentives would have reduced that by $3 billion. So New York would have gotten $24 billion in net new tax revenue. $24 billion that didn't exist before. $24 billion that could have gone to schools and subways and infrastructure. Kennedy let that number hang in the air. You killed a deal that would have generated $24 billion in tax revenue because you thought tax incentives were cash. You don't understand the difference between foregoing future revenue and spending existing money. That's not a C-plus mistake, Representative. That's a failing grade mistake. He pulled out employment statistics. Those 25,000 direct Amazon jobs paying an average of $150,000 a year, that's $3.75 billion in annual wages per year, going to working people, families, your constituents. The economists estimated another 67,000 indirect jobs would have been created, restaurants to feed those workers, dry cleaners for their clothes, construction jobs to build housing, coffee shops, gyms, retail stores. All the economic activity that happens when you inject 25,000 high-paying jobs into a community. Kennedy's voice got harder. You killed 92,000 jobs total. You killed billions of dollars in wages. You killed tax revenue that could have funded schools and infrastructure for decades. And you did it because you failed to understand basic economics. He pulled out more recent data. You know what's really tragic? Amazon didn't go away. They still opened facilities in New York, just not in your district. They opened a facility in Staten Island. They expanded in the Bronx. Other parts of New York got those jobs. Your constituents got nothing except higher unemployment and the knowledge that their representative cares more about scoring political points than their economic well-being. Kennedy sat back down, but he wasn't done. You called those $150,000 a year jobs for the rich. Let me tell you something about New York City, Representative. $150,000 isn't rich in New York. That's a teacher married to a firefighter. That's 2 nurses. That's working families trying to build a life in an expensive city. But you called them rich and killed their opportunities. He looked at the progressive side of the audience. Some of y'all probably agreed with her at the time. You probably thought she was standing up to Amazon, sticking it to Bezos. But think about it now. Think about what actually happened. She didn't hurt Bezos. She didn't hurt Amazon. Amazon is doing fine. They just went somewhere else. The only people she hurt were the working families in Queens who could have gotten those jobs. Kennedy pulled out one final document on this topic. This is unemployment data for Queens before and after the Amazon deal fell apart. Unemployment in Long Island City went up. Commercial real estate development stalled. Property values didn't appreciate the way they would have with Amazon there. The entire economic trajectory of that neighborhood changed because one person with a C+ in econ thought she understood tax policy better than professional economists. He looked at AOC with something like pity. 25,000 families, real families, they could have had good jobs. Their kids could have had better schools funded by that tax revenue. The neighborhood could have been revitalized. Instead, they got nothing. Because you thought tax incentives were cash money sitting in a vault somewhere. The room was absolutely silent except for some quiet, angry murmuring from the progressive side. Even AOC's strongest supporters couldn't defend this one. The Amazon decision had always been controversial, but hearing it laid out this way, with this level of detail and these facts, made it indefensible. Kennedy organized his papers. Tax policy matters, folks. Economic policy matters. These decisions affect real people's lives. That's why we need representatives who actually understand economics, not social media influencers who took 3 college classes and think that qualifies them to redesign entire industries. He looked at AOC one more time. You cost your district billions of dollars and 92,000 jobs because you failed to understand how tax incentives work. That's not a policy disagreement, representative. That's incompetence. And incompetence at that level should disqualify you from making economic policy for anyone. Tapper tried to move on, but Kennedy held up a finger. One more thing, just one more thing about this. He was enjoying himself now. You know what tax incentives are called in economics? Opportunity cost. It's the cost of choosing one option over another. New York chose to offer Amazon a reduced tax rate in exchange for $27 billion in total tax revenue and 92,000 jobs. The opportunity cost was $3 billion in potential full-rate taxes. But they chose the deal because $27 billion is more than $3 billion and 92,000 jobs is more than 0 jobs. That's what economists call a good trade. He smiled. Of course, you know that if you'd gotten better than a C+ in micro, they teach opportunity cost in like week 2. The conservative side absolutely erupted. Even some people on the progressive side were clapping now. The moderators would later say it was one of the most brutal moments in political debate history. Kennedy had taken AOC's signature victory, killing the Amazon deal, and completely reframed it as her most catastrophic failure. And he'd done it with math, not insults. Comment below if you remember the Amazon disaster and how everyone in Queens was furious at her, because it's about to get even worse for her credibility. They took a commercial break. CNN needed time to regroup. Tapper's earpiece was probably screaming with producers trying to figure out how to salvage this. AOC's team surrounded her, frantically talking strategy, trying to prep her for whatever was coming next. Some of them looked like they wanted to leave, just walk out of the building and pretend this never happened. Kennedy sat calmly, sipping his capitalism coffee, making notes on his legal pad like he was grading papers. Someone from the conservative audience came up to shake his hand. He was gracious, friendly, but he didn't break his focus. He knew there was more work to do. When they came back from break, Tapper attempted to steer toward climate policy. It was supposed to be safer ground. The Green New Deal was AOC's marquee legislation. She'd been working on climate activism for years. Surely she'd be more prepared for this topic. Surely not. A young woman from the progressive side stood up and asked about the need for bold climate action. She praised the Green New Deal as exactly the kind of ambitious thinking we needed. Would the senator and representative discuss the merits of comprehensive climate legislation? AOC lit up. This was her territory. She launched into her prepared remarks about climate change being an existential threat, about how we needed dramatic action, about how the Green New Deal would create millions of jobs while saving the planet. She talked about 10 years to act, about the science being clear, about how this was about survival. The progressive side ate it up. They'd heard this speech before and it never got old for them. Kennedy waited until she was completely done, until the applause faded. Then he picked up a thin stack of papers, maybe 14 or 15 pages stapled together. This right here, he said, holding it up, is the Green New Deal resolution. The whole thing, 14 pages. I read it last night. Took me 8 minutes. I've read Chinese food menus that were more detailed. Chuckles from the conservative side. Now I want to be fair, Kennedy continued. This is an ambitious document. It promises a lot of things. Let me just read some of them. It promises to make America carbon neutral in 10 years. Guarantee a job to everyone who wants one, provide universal health care, free college tuition, rebuild or retrofit every building in America to meet green standards, eliminate air travel and replace it with high-speed rail. He looked up. That's not even half the list. It goes on. He set the document down. What I found interesting is what's not in this 14-page resolution. There's no cost estimate, not even a ballpark figure, just promises. Big, beautiful promises with no price tag attached. Kennedy pulled out several other documents. So I asked some people to estimate the cost. Professional economists, think tanks across the political spectrum. You know what they came back with? He read from the studies. The American Action Forum estimated $93 trillion over 10 years. The Heritage Foundation said similar numbers. Even liberal-leaning think tanks that support aggressive climate action estimated at least 40 to 50 trillion. Let's split the difference and call it $70 trillion over 10 years. That's $7 trillion per year. Kennedy wrote that number huge on his legal pad. $7 trillion per year. Now let's talk about how we'd pay for that, he continued, his voice taking on that teacher tone again. The entire federal revenue for 2022, that's the most recent year we have complete data, was $4.4 trillion. That's everything. Income taxes, corporate taxes, payroll taxes, tariffs, every penny the federal government collects. Your plan costs $7 trillion per year. That's 1.6 times more than the entire federal government collects in revenue. He looked at AOC. So how do you pay for it? AOC tried her talking points. We'd tax billionaires and close corporate loopholes and… Let's do that math, Kennedy interrupted, pulling out more data. Total wealth, not income, but total accumulated wealth of all American billionaires combined is approximately $4.5 trillion. If we confiscated it all, every penny, left them all completely destitute, we could fund your plan for… What's 4.5 divided by 7? He did the math. About 7.5 months. Then what? Silence. Corporate tax loopholes, Kennedy continued. Closing them might generate an additional $100 billion per year. Maybe. That still leaves us short about $6.9 trillion per year. Military budget is about $700 billion, and you're not actually proposing to eliminate the military entirely, are you? AOC started to talk about modern monetary theory, about how the government can print money for important priorities. Kennedy smiled like she'd walked into another trap. Modern monetary theory, that's interesting. That's the idea that the government can just print money to pay for things because it controls the currency. Sounds great, doesn't it? Free money. He pulled out historical data. You know what happens when governments print massive amounts of money without corresponding economic growth? It's called inflation. Remember inflation, that thing you couldn't properly define earlier. He showed graphs from Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Weimar Germany. Print enough money without the economic growth to back it up, and you get hyperinflation. Currency becomes worthless. Savings evaporate. Fixed income people get destroyed. It's happened dozens of times in history. But I guess they don't teach monetary history when you only take 3 econ classes. Kennedy wasn't done with the Green New Deal. Let's talk logistics. Your plan says we're going to retrofit or rebuild every building in America to meet green standards. Do you know how many buildings there are in America? AOC didn't answer. 136 million buildings. Residential, commercial, industrial, everything. You want to retrofit or rebuild them all in 10 years. That's 3,650 days. Kennedy did the math. You'd have to complete 37,000 buildings per day, every day, including weekends and Christmas, for 10 straight years. He let that absurdity settle. Representative, there aren't enough construction workers in America to do that. There aren't enough materials. The supply chains don't exist. The training programs don't exist. The physical capacity to do what you're proposing literally does not exist. He pulled out more documents. Your plan also promises to eliminate air travel and replace it with high-speed rail. The distance from New York to Los Angeles is 2,800 miles. The fastest high-speed rail in the world in China goes about 200 miles per hour. That's a 14-hour train ride. You're saying people should take a 14-hour train instead of a 5-hour flight. Kennedy showed a map with proposed rail lines drawn all over it. You'd need to build approximately 30,000 miles of high-speed rail in 10 years. That's 8.2 miles per day, every single day. China, with authoritarian government, unlimited cheap labor, and minimal environmental regulations, builds about 1,000 to 1,500 miles of high-speed rail per year. You think America is going to build 10,000 miles per year with union labor, environmental impact statements, and local zoning boards? The audience was laughing now, even some people on the progressive side. The sheer absurdity of the scale was becoming clear. Your plan requires covering an area larger than the state of Texas with solar panels, Kennedy continued. It requires battery storage technology that doesn't exist at the necessary scale. It requires completely transforming the transportation system. It requires training 20 million construction workers overnight, workers who don't currently exist. And it requires spending more money per year than the federal government collects in total revenue. He looked directly at AOC. This isn't a policy proposal, Representative. This is a letter to Santa Claus. You've promised every toy in the catalog, but you haven't explained how Santa's going to make them, deliver them, or pay for them. Because you don't understand economics, logistics, or how anything actually works in the real world. Kennedy's voice got quieter, which somehow made it more devastating. Kennedy said we were going to the moon. Know what the difference was? They had a plan. They had engineers calculating trajectories and fuel requirements. They had a budget. They knew what technology needed to be invented, and they invented it. They were ambitious, but they were grounded in reality. He held up the Green New Deal again. This isn't ambitious. This is delusional. Ambitious is hard but possible. This is literally impossible. You can't retrofit 37,000 buildings per day. You can't build 8 miles of high-speed rail per day. You can't spend $7 trillion per year when the government only collects $4 trillion. The math doesn't work. The logistics don't work. The plan doesn't work. Kennedy organized his papers. You wrote a wish list and called it legislation. You made promises you can't possibly keep to people who trusted you. And worst of all, you did it knowing, or you should have known if you'd learned anything in those economics classes, that none of this was feasible. He looked at the camera. Folks, we need real solutions to climate change, not fantasy, not impossible promises that can never be delivered. We need realistic, achievable policies based on sound economics and actual capabilities, not this. The progressive side was deflated. Their hero legislation had just been exposed as complete fiction. The conservative side was energized. This was everything they'd hoped for and more. Share this if you're tired of politicians making promises they can never keep. Because Kennedy's not done. There's still more. During the next commercial break, you could see the body language. AOC looked exhausted, beaten down. Her staff was trying to rally her, but the energy was gone. The math was inescapable. The facts were undeniable. She'd built her entire political brand on the Green New Deal, and Kennedy had just demolished it with basic arithmetic and common sense. Kennedy looked as fresh as when he'd started. He reorganized his documents into new piles, checked his legal pad. There were still several topics he wanted to cover, and he had about 30 minutes left to do it. When they came back, Tapper looked like a man who'd given up. He wasn't even trying to moderate anymore. He just posed questions and let Kennedy go wherever he wanted. Senator, Representative Ocasio-Cortez frequently discusses income inequality and the need for wealth redistribution. Your thoughts? Kennedy smiled. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to discuss the representative's personal finances, her personal wealth, how she lives, because I think there's a real interesting contradiction there that voters should know about. He pulled out financial disclosure forms, the kind members of Congress have to file publicly. When Representative Ocasio-Cortez was elected in 2018, her financial disclosure showed she had about $15,000 in savings. That was it. She'd been working as a bartender, living paycheck to paycheck. Very relatable, very working class. That's been her whole brand. I'm one of you, I understand struggle, I'm not like those rich politicians. Kennedy looked up. What do you drive now, Representative? AOC hesitated. You could see her calculating whether to answer. I don't see how that's relevant. It's a Tesla Model 3, isn't it? Kennedy pulled out photos clearly taken by paparazzi or captured from her social media. AOC standing next to a Tesla. AOC getting into a Tesla. Very nice car. I looked up the pricing. Base model starts around 40,000. The one you have, based on the features visible in these photos, probably cost closer to 50,000. How'd you afford that? I make a congressional salary. You do, Kennedy agreed. $174,000 per year. That's a lot of money. Top 10% of American earners. You are literally the rich that you keep talking about taxing. He pulled out more financial documents. But let's look at your expenses. You maintain an apartment in Washington, D.C. Rent in Navy Yard where you live runs $3,000 to $4,000 a month for a nice place. You also maintain a residence in New York that's required for your district. That's expensive. You travel frequently. You wear designer clothes to events. You get professional hair and makeup for appearances. You drive a Tesla. Kennedy added it up on his pad. Your required expenses for 2 residences in expensive cities probably run $8,000 to $10,000 per month. That's about $100,000 to $120,000 per year. Plus you're paying roughly $40,000 in federal and state income taxes on your salary. So you're spending about $160 out of $174 just on lifestyle and taxes. That leaves maybe $14,000 per year for savings. He looked at her. Yet you went from $15,000 in savings in 2018 to owning a $50,000 Tesla a few years later. Where'd the money come from? AOC's face flushed. I'm financially responsible. I budget carefully. I'm sure you do, Kennedy said. But the math doesn't add up unless, oh wait. He pulled out publishing contracts and speaking fee records, book deals, a memoir about being working class written while making $174,000 a year, speaking fees at universities and corporate events. You've done quite well for yourself, Representative. Congratulations. That's the American dream right there. Kennedy leaned back. Here's my point. You make more money than 90% of Americans. You drive a luxury electric car. You live in expensive neighborhoods in 2 of the most expensive cities in the country. You wear designer clothes. You attend exclusive events. You are rich. By any reasonable definition, you are rich. He held up the photo of her with the Tesla. But you've built your entire brand on being working class. You can't be rich and pretend you're poor. You can't drive a $50,000 car and claim to represent people riding the bus. You can't make more money than 9 out of 10 Americans and call yourself working class. That's not representation. That's false advertising. I came from a working class background, AOC protested. And now you're rich, Kennedy shot back. Past tense and present tense are different things. Your father was an architect. You went to a private university. You worked as a bartender for a few years. Now you're a member of Congress making 6 figures and building wealth through book deals and speaking fees. That's fantastic. I'm genuinely happy for you. The American dream is supposed to work that way. He pointed at her. But you can't enjoy the benefits of capitalism while claiming to oppose it. You can't get rich off the system while telling everyone else the system is broken. You can't drive a Tesla paid for by capitalism while promoting socialism. Pick a lane, Representative. Are you rich or are you working class? Because your bank account says rich but your rhetoric says poor, and you cannot be both. The audience was split on this one. Some people thought it was unfair to criticize her wealth. Others thought Kennedy had a point about the hypocrisy, but everyone could see the contradiction. The math was clear. She was rich by any objective standard, yet her entire political identity was built on being working class. Kennedy wasn't quite done. You know who doesn't have this problem? Bernie Sanders. He's a millionaire, owns 3 houses, and he's honest about it. He doesn't pretend to be poor. He says, I'm well off and I think rich people, including me, should pay more taxes. That's consistent. That's honest. But you're out here driving a Tesla to your luxury apartment while tweeting about income inequality. That's not consistency. That's hypocrisy. 5 topics down. Kennedy checked his watch. Plenty of time for more. And he had 3 more topics prepared that were going to be even more personally devastating. The next question came from a conservative in the audience who asked about AOC's comments about her grandmother in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Kennedy's expression changed slightly. This one was more personal, more sensitive. He knew he had to handle it carefully, but he also knew the facts were damning. Representative, after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico in 2017, you spoke very emotionally about your grandmother's suffering. You said she was living in terrible conditions. Damaged roof, no power, inadequate food and water. It was moving testimony. A lot of people were concerned. Kennedy pulled out printed tweets. In June 2021, you tweeted about your grandmother still suffering. Quote, "My abuela is still living in a place with a collapsed ceiling," and you blamed the Trump administration for not providing adequate aid. He set down the tweets. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh saw your tweets. He organized a GoFundMe campaign, raised over $100,000 specifically to help your grandmother, to fix her roof, restore power, whatever she needed. He contacted your office to arrange delivery of the funds. Kennedy looked at AOC. Your office refused the money, called it a publicity stunt, said it was offensive. $100,000 from regular Americans who wanted to help your grandmother, and you said no. AOC started to respond, but Kennedy continued. Then reporters went to Puerto Rico to check on your grandmother. You know what they found? The house was fine. Repairs had been done. Your grandmother told reporters she was okay, that family had been helping her, that she wasn't suffering the way you described. He let that sink in. So let me understand this. You told America your grandmother was in crisis. You blamed the government. You made it a major political issue. People offered to help, actual, tangible help in the form of $100,000. You rejected it because accepting would have been politically inconvenient. Then it turns out the whole situation was exaggerated anyway. Kennedy's voice got harder. You used your own grandmother's supposed suffering, real or manufactured, for political points. Then when actual help was offered, you turned it down because it came from the wrong people politically. That's not advocacy, Representative. That's exploitation. You turned your own grandmother into a political prop. The room was uncomfortable now. This felt different from the economic arguments. This was personal. This was about family. You had a choice, Kennedy said quietly. Your grandmother needed help, or so you claimed. Americans of all political beliefs offered that help. You could have accepted gracefully and said thank you. This shows that Americans care about Puerto Rico regardless of politics. Instead, you rejected it, insulted the donors, and then it came out that the situation wasn't even as bad as you described. He looked at the camera. That tells you everything about priorities. It's not about helping people. It's about scoring political points. It's about looking good on social media, not about doing good in real life. Even some of AOC's supporters in the audience looked troubled by this. Using family members for political purposes, then rejecting help from political opponents. It didn't sit right with anyone. Kennedy moved on. He had more ground to cover. Representative, where do you live in Washington, D.C.? He asked, shifting to his next topic. I have an apartment in Navy Yard, in a luxury apartment complex, Kennedy added. Let's talk about that building. It has a rooftop pool, fitness center, yoga studio, resident lounge, concierge service, package room, bike storage, parking garage. Very nice amenities. Rent for a one-bedroom runs about $3,000 to $4,000 a month. Two bedrooms go for $4,000 to $6,000. He pulled out the building information. Your building was built in 2018. New luxury development. The kind of development you've opposed in your own district. You've called luxury apartments instruments of gentrification. You've said they displace working people and destroy communities. But you live in one. Kennedy showed voting records. In 2019, a similar luxury development was proposed in your district. Beautiful building, waterfront, similar amenities to where you live. You opposed it. Said it would gentrify the neighborhood, raise rents, push out working families. The project was blocked. He looked at her. So luxury apartments are bad in Queens but good in D.C. Or are they only bad when other people want to build them? Kennedy pulled out more information. Your building has strict security. Key fob access, cameras, controlled entry. No homeless shelters nearby. The building management actually lobbied against affordable housing developments in the surrounding area. You know why? Because luxury building residents don't want affordable housing next door. Might affect property values. He leaned forward. Did you speak out against that? Did you use your platform to demand your building accept affordable housing nearby? Did you insist on Section 8 vouchers being accepted? Or did you just enjoy your rooftop pool in peace? Silence. There's more, Kennedy continued. Your building was constructed by non-union labor. The development company has a history of fighting unionization. You've said every construction project should be union-only, but you live in a building built by non-union workers. That's convenient. He spread out the documents. You live in luxury while opposing it for others. You enjoy amenities while calling them immoral. You benefit from non-union construction while demanding unions for everyone else. You oppose affordable housing near your building while demanding it in your district. Kennedy's voice rose slightly. Representative, that's not socialism. That's limousine liberalism. That's do as I say, not as I do. That's hypocrisy at its finest. AOC tried to defend it as a personal choice, but Kennedy cut through that immediately. It's personal until you make it policy. You can't live in luxury while demanding others accept affordable housing next door. You can't enjoy a rooftop pool while calling luxury developments gentrification. You can't benefit from non-union labor while demanding union-only construction. That's the definition of hypocrisy. The audience on both sides was reacting now. Even progressives who supported affordable housing and unions could see the contradiction. She was living one way while demanding others live differently. One more topic. Kennedy was saving the best for last. Let's talk about small business, Kennedy said, pulling out his final stack of documents. The backbone of the American economy, the engine of job creation, the place where most Americans actually work. Representative, how do you feel about small businesses? AOC gave a generic answer about supporting entrepreneurship and small business owners. Kennedy smiled that dangerous smile. That's interesting because your voting record tells a completely different story. Since you entered Congress in 2019, there have been 17 bills specifically designed to help small businesses. Tax relief, regulatory reform, access to capital, pandemic assistance. Want to guess how many you voted for? He waited. AOC said nothing. 2. You voted for 2 out of 17. That's an 11% support rate. You opposed 15 bills designed to help small businesses. Why? Kennedy pulled out the specifics. H.R. 1994, the Small Business Relief Act, provided targeted tax cuts for businesses under 50 employees. You voted no. H.R. 7010, the Paycheck Protection Program extension that helped small businesses keep workers during COVID. You voted no. H.R. 2877, reducing regulations on small business loans. You voted no. He looked up. Every single time there was a bill to help the bodega on the corner, the family restaurant, the local bookstore, you voted against it. Why? Those bills had corporate giveaways hidden in them. AOC started. They were targeted at small businesses, Kennedy interrupted. Companies under 50 employees, not corporations, not billionaires, the local pizza place, the independent bookstore, the family dry cleaner, and you voted to deny them help. He pulled out devastating statistics. During COVID, your district lost 3,400 small businesses permanently. Gone, forever closed. You know who stayed open? Target, Walmart, Amazon thrived. But the small businesses that couldn't afford to weather months of forced closure, they died. You supported the lockdowns. You supported keeping them closed. You opposed the relief bills that would have helped them survive. Kennedy's voice was rising now, genuine anger coming through. You stood by while 3,400 small businesses in your own district disappeared, and you know who benefited? The big corporations you claim to oppose. He pulled out economic analysis. You support a $15 federal minimum wage with no exceptions for small business. Every economist across the political spectrum agrees that would eliminate about 1.4 million jobs, mostly at small businesses. You know why? Because Walmart can afford $15 an hour. Amazon already pays more than that. But the local pizza place can't. The independent bookstore can't. The family dry cleaner can't. Kennedy stood up for his closing. You've never run a business, Representative. You've never hired anyone. You've never made payroll. You've never stayed up at night wondering how to keep the lights on. You've never had to tell an employee you can't give them a raise because the government just raised your costs. You've never worried about regulations or taxes or competition from corporations with unlimited resources. He pointed at her. But you vote to make it harder for people who do all those things. You vote to raise their costs. You vote to increase their regulations. You vote to help their big corporate competitors. You vote against every single bill that would make their lives easier. And you do it while calling yourself a champion of working people. Kennedy's voice got quiet again, more powerful in its restraint. Small businesses aren't statistics, representative. They're the couple who took out a second mortgage to open a restaurant. They're the immigrant family running a grocery store. They're the single mom who started a cleaning business. They're the American dream in action. And your policies are killing them. He pulled out final data. Your father was a small business owner. He ran an architecture firm. He passed away when you were young, but he understood what it meant to risk everything to build something, to create jobs. Somehow his daughter grew up to become the greatest threat to small business in Congress. Kennedy gathered all his documents into one pile. You've never run a business. You've never created a job. You've never built anything except a social media following. But you voted to destroy the people who do. You've supported policies that help Amazon and Walmart crush their small competitors. You've opposed every effort to give small businesses a fighting chance. And you've done it all while claiming to represent the working class. He turned to the full audience. The working class doesn't work for billionaires, folks. They work for small businesses, and she's putting them out of business. A $15 minimum wage sounds great until the business closes and everyone makes $0 an hour. You know who can afford it? Amazon, Walmart, Target, the big corporations. You know who can't? The bodega, the family restaurant, the local boutique. Kennedy's voice was full of contempt now. You're not helping the working class, representative. You're helping Amazon destroy its competition. And you're doing it in the name of socialism while driving your Tesla to your luxury apartment. He picked up his final document. This is data from your own district. Since you took office, small business formation is down 37%. Small business closures are up 62%. The number of people employed by small businesses in your district has dropped by 11,000. But Amazon just opened a fulfillment center. Target expanded. The chains are thriving. Kennedy walked toward the center of the stage. You came here tonight to debate economics, but you can't debate something you don't understand. You got a C+ in Econ 101 and decided you were qualified to redesign the economy. You killed 25,000 jobs because you don't understand tax incentives. You proposed a $93 trillion plan with no way to pay for it. You drive a Tesla while claiming to be working class. You exploited your grandmother for political points. You live in luxury while opposing it for others. And you've spent 5 years in Congress systematically voting to destroy small businesses. He stood at the moderator's table one final time. This wasn't a debate. This was a demonstration of what happens when someone with no expertise, no experience, and no understanding of basic economics gets power. She's not a representative. She's an influencer who stumbled into Congress with a Twitter following, a C+ in economics, and absolutely no idea what she's doing. Kennedy looked back at AOC. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're completely out of your depth. You should stick to social media and leave serious policy to people who understand mathematics, economics, and how the real world actually works. The room absolutely exploded, half in thunderous applause that went on for 30 seconds straight, half in outraged shouting. Tapper had lost all control 20 minutes ago. Cameras were flashing everywhere. The clip was already going viral. Someone had been live streaming to Twitter, and the view count was climbing into the millions in real time. AOC sat frozen, her face a mixture of shock, humiliation, and something that looked like she might cry. Her staff surrounded her immediately, trying to shield her from cameras. Kennedy calmly packed up all his documents, finished the last of his capitalism coffee, and waved to the crowd like he just delivered a particularly satisfying legal closing argument, which, in every way that mattered, he had. Within 2 hours, clips had 40 million views across all platforms. Within 24 hours, it was the most-watched political debate moment since Trump-Clinton. But this wasn't partisan back-and-forth or name-calling. This was systematic destruction backed by documentation, facts, and receipts. C+ in Econ trended #1 worldwide for 48 hours. Conservative accounts had a field day, but even mainstream media couldn't ignore it because the evidence was too thorough, the arguments too sound. CNN's own post-debate analysts struggled to defend AOC. Tapper acknowledged she appeared unprepared for Senator Kennedy's level of detail. MSNBC tried to spin it as bullying, but when they brought economists on to fact-check Kennedy's claims, they had to admit he was essentially correct about the Amazon deal, the Green New Deal costs, the voting record on small business. Progressive outlets had trouble too. The Young Turks tried to defend her, but spent most of their segment finding Kennedy's claims accurate. Jacobin published a piece criticizing AOC for losing the narrative and being unprepared. The polls told the real story. AOC's favorability dropped 12 points in her district within 1 week. Among voters over 50 and anyone with business or economics background, her approval was 27%. A primary challenger announced within 3 days. The squad tried to rally around her, but even progressive Democrats in Congress quietly distanced themselves. Nancy Pelosi said she hadn't watched it but encouraged all members to be well prepared when discussing policy. The real damage was to her policy agenda. The Green New Deal lost its remaining co-sponsors within a week. The legislation was effectively dead. Her position on the Financial Services Committee was questioned. Her speaking fees, which had commanded $25,000 per event, dried up completely. Universities suddenly had budget constraints. Corporate events went in a different direction. The influencer-to-politician pipeline had hit a wall. 6 months later, AOC was rarely seen on national television. She'd retreated to carefully controlled social media where she couldn't be challenged in real time. Her legislation went nowhere. Her influence waned. The influencer who'd become a congresswoman was becoming just an influencer again. And every time someone mentioned her economics degree, someone else would reply with, "You mean the C+." Kennedy became a folk hero to conservatives and a respected voice to moderates who appreciated evidence over rhetoric. His coffee cup became a bestseller, proceeds going to small business relief funds. When asked about the debate months later, Kennedy was modest. "I just asked questions and presented facts. If that's controversial, our education system is in worse shape than I thought." But everyone who watched knew the truth. Kennedy hadn't just won a debate. He'd provided a master class in how to dismantle bad ideas with good evidence, how to expose hypocrisy with humor, and how to defend free markets with facts, a Southern drawl, and a smile that cut like a knife. Senator John Kennedy did something remarkable that night. He exposed the difference between social media stardom and actual expertise, between virtue signaling and real understanding, between talking points and policy knowledge, between making speeches and making sense. He showed that you don't need to shout or insult to win. You just need to be right, have evidence, and present it clearly. The receipts always win eventually, and Kennedy brought every single one. Share this with everyone who's tired of economic illiteracy in Congress. Comment below who else needs the Kennedy treatment. Because America deserves representatives who understand the policies they're proposing, not influencers with Twitter followings, C+ grades, and absolutely no idea what they're actually doing. The age of style over substance is ending. The facts matter. The math matters. And Senator Kennedy just proved it in the most devastating 90 minutes of political television in modern history.